Folks, a little bit earlier today, I got a chance to talk with Cheri Beasley. She's the former North Carolina Supreme Court Chief Justice, who is a Democratic nominee for the United States Senate. We've been waiting to get her on for quite some time. Finally got a chance to chat with her. Here is our conversation. All right, Cheri Beasley, finally got you on the show. I've been waiting to talk to you for quite some time, so let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. You lost your race for Supreme Court Justice in North Carolina in 2020 by 400 votes. What did you learn in that race that is helping you when it comes to now running for the United States Senate? What are you focused on?
Roland, thanks so much for having me. I was running for the office of Chief Justice, and in North Carolina, judges are elected statewide in contested races. And with 5.5 million votes cast, I fell short by 401 votes, but performed well in rural communities and urban communities and outperformed almost every statewide elected official other than the governor. I'm really excited about this race, and it is awesome to be the Democratic nominee. Very thankful for voters for coming out and supporting my candidacy. You know, I know we have been working really hard in this election. I've had two successful statewide elections, a local election as a young mom when people doubted that I could win, and we won that race by 30 points. And in 2008, I was successful in a statewide election in 2014. What we know is that we must work hard for every single vote. We are traveling across the state, meeting voters in backyards and places of worship and everywhere else. And we're investing in voters now. And so we know it's going to be important. I've been in tough fights before. I've never backed down, and I won't back down now. But we have an opportunity to really reach voters and let them know the magnitude of this election and that we really can win it.
So I saw a piece the other day in Politico that just had me totally befuddled. And it talked about how Democrats were trying to figure out, whether to go all in North Carolina because they hadn't won a Senate race in 2008. And I'm sitting here going, correct me if I'm wrong, Democrats have a majority on the state Supreme Court. You have a democratically elected governor right now. You've had successful challenges against the law, against gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering, political gerrymandering. You have people fighting back against voter suppression. How in the world would these folks in D.C. not go full in when you have a potential to actually win the U.S. Senate seat if you put the resources and the boots on the ground to do it?
You know, Roland, I'm really excited about where we are. I've been in public service in North Carolina for nearly 30 years as a public defender, a judge, and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of North Carolina. And I have been working hard to uphold the law and the Constitution and to make sure that laws are applied equally to all people. We really do have an amazing opportunity. I know that Washington has failed people here in North Carolina, and so many people are struggling. We do have an opportunity, and the other side knows we have an opportunity. We know that the NRSC is running ads to distort my judicial record. And they're committed to spending millions of dollars to do that. They know that they can lose and that we can win. So I'm excited about where we are in this race. I've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and respect the rule of law, and really thankful for the sheriffs who stepped up, condemning the ads against me, and really understand that we really can win this race, and they're very supportive.
But in order to win the race, you got to have folks who believe in it, and you've got to hit those rural parts of the state. When I examined the 2020 race, and when Tillis was running, I saw some numbers anywhere from 16 to 18% among African Americans, and I was talking to folks there, trying to explain to folks what I was asking. What was going on when you were talking about one of the people who's the architects of the voter suppression laws. You still have a Republican Party in your state that is doing all it can to suppress Black voters. You've had all of these groups fighting like crazy over the last decade. So North Carolina literally has an opportunity to be like Georgia if you're maximizing that turnout.
We do have an amazing opportunity to really win this race. And I'm very thankful that I've always performed well in rural communities and urban communities. If you look at a map of the last election, you'll see that I was able to outperform President Biden and Tom Tillis. And so we've been able to do well in these communities. We also know that there is a national interest. We've seen the Senate Majority PAC invest in North Carolina on my behalf. This race is winnable. My campaign is certainly making investments of voters all across this state. And we are excited about the energy and responses that we're seeing from voters here in North Carolina.
The East Carolina University released a poll showing that your opponent, Representative Ted Budd, holds an 8-point lead. When it comes to the issues, how are you going to differentiate yourself? And what are you saying to the voters as to where you stand on why they should be electing you over Budd for the United States Senate?
There's actually additional external polling that shows us actually neck and neck. And that's what Republicans know. That's why they're investing in this race, working hard to distort my record. But, you know, I'm really excited about where we are in this race. And there is a real distinction. I'm a mom who has raised her twin sons along with my husband with shared values of hard work and faith and integrity. And I didn't raise my children in Washington. I raised them in North Carolina. And what we know about Ted Budd is that he is not good for North Carolina. He does not speak for the people in North Carolina. We know that here we are in a shortage with baby formula, and he just voted against the legislation to increase the supply of baby formula for people in North Carolina. We know that he's not good for North Carolina because he voted against increasing veterans pay. He voted against infrastructure legislation, which would have brought good paying jobs to North Carolina. He voted against increasing and making access healthcare more accessible to people here in North Carolina. So actions speak louder than words, and he does not speak for the people here in North Carolina. He will not put North Carolina first. He will put special interests first. We need somebody in the Senate who's going to fight hard for the people of the state, and that's exactly why I'm running.
And when we look at, I mean, obviously, you've been focused on even the issue once the Supreme Court rules on Roe v. Wade and that particular issue and how it affects voters there in North Carolina.
You know, I'm a former judge for 22 years and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and Roe told us that a woman's right to privacy to make her own reproductive health choices are grounded in the 14th Amendment and other constitutional amendments, and really and without government interference. And so to roll back constitutional rights granted by Roe is disheartening. In fact, there's never been a time. We've seen certainly over the course of history that rights are granted, but the fact that they've been rolled back is deeply disturbing. We know that my opponent, Ted Budd, is open to absolute ban for abortion, even in the instance of rape, incest, or risk to health of a mother. That's just absolutely unacceptable. People and women in North Carolina know and remember a time before Roe. We need to fight to secure this constitutional right. And certainly, if I remember the Senate now, I would have voted to support the Women's Health Protection Act. And people in North Carolina are incensed by this recent leaked draft opinion, and they're incensed by the Senate's failure to act.
Now, when we talk about the concerns of Black voters in particular, you talked about outperforming President Biden in 2020. When you look at polling data now, his numbers are down across the board in North Carolina, and there is tremendous enthusiasm on the Republican side. What are you doing to speak to that, to address that enthusiasm issues, to get Democratic voters, to independent voters, to get young voters, to get African-American voters to understand that sitting this election out is not an option? If you're upset about the George Floyd Justice Act not being passed, of course, tomorrow's the second anniversary of George Floyd's death. If you're upset about voter suppression laws not being passed, well, if Democrats expand their majority in the United States Senate, you can actually overcome the obstacles put in place by Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema.
I think people really do get it. We are seeing excitement among Democrats, independents, and Republicans about my candidacy. And people really do understand the magnitude of this race. But we are reaching out to everybody, young people, college students, and people in urban and rural counties and everywhere else. And we really are investing in voters and making sure that people really understand. I think the other piece of that is, it matters that you have a candidate who cares, who's a mother who's raising children in North Carolina, who is invested in North Carolina, who's been in service to the people of North Carolina for nearly 30 years. It matters. There's a real opportunity to excite voters in a way that we've not had for quite some time, frankly, since President Obama ran and did well in North Carolina. So we are excited about working with people across the state, really energizing people and helping them to really see what's at stake, that our constitutional rights are at stake. And even with this leaked opinion, which is about the constitutional right to privacy, when you look at the language of this opinion, it really does make us all concerned that really civil rights are at stake. And people really must understand the magnitude of this election, the opportunity to expand the Democratic majority, but the opportunity to also have a senator who's going to commit to passing legislation that's really grounded in humanity and in justice.
But here's what's strange to me. 10 Black people gunned down in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. Last week, the House passes a bill to deal with domestic terrorism. One Republican voted for it, Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Representative Ted Budd voted against that. We're talking about in the aftermath of 10 Black people being shot, and this man would not support a bill that would beef up federal efforts to deal with domestic terrorism and white supremacy.
That's another example of how Ted Budd doesn't serve North Carolina well, how he will not put North Carolina first, nor will he put this nation first. My heart goes out to the families and community of Buffalo who are dealing with just a horrendous tragedy. And we really must do more. And you're right, the people of North Carolina should have expected Ted Budd to support this legislation, and he didn't. He fell short.
Again, one of the issues people are really concerned about voter suppression. Obviously, all these laws that are being passed. Your North Carolina legislature was right there with it as well. And so, we see ballots being thrown out, thousands of ballots in Texas, in Georgia, how they're being impacted. And so, what are you also doing on the voter education front to ensure that folks don't get caught up in this vortex of voter fraud, which is totally BS, and that their votes, their ballots are actually fully counted?
Well, there's education around making sure that people understand how to cast a vote. There's also education around making sure that people understand that their precinct might have moved, particularly on college campuses, where on some of the campuses, there's now a line drawn through the campus, and where there was one precinct, there are now two. So we're certainly being a part of those educational efforts, but we're also making sure that elections will be monitored. There will be lots of folks in the general election who are monitoring voting precincts so that if there are problems that arise, people will have someone to report those incidents to immediately so that they can be rectified.
Obviously, we're seeing intense focus by a lot of Black women all across the country as well. And so what is it looking like for you there? Do you have an energetic base of Black women who are really ready to go out and do all necessary to put you in the United States Senate?
There is a lot of excitement around my candidacy. Black women, Black people, but really all people. I mean, I've been an elected official for 22 years, and so we've been building upon relationships for over the last decade. And so we're really excited about where we are in this race. But I can also tell you this, Roland, the first time I ever saw an African-American woman presiding in a courtroom, I was a practicing lawyer, and it was then Judge Patricia Timmons Goodson. So I certainly know that diversity and representation matter, and I know that our institutions are better when we are diverse and have voices from a lot of folks represented at the table. There are 24 women currently serving in the Senate, and there are 0 African-American women in the Senate. And it matters how the Senate looks, but it also matters how the Senate works. And so I'm really running to make sure that we're making changes to address access to health care and expanding the ACA and with a public option, that we're expanding Medicaid here in North Carolina, that we're lowering prescription drug costs and protecting our constitutional rights and so much more. But I have to say that a lot of people really are excited. And I know it makes a difference to have the voice of an African-American woman on the Senate floor.
Last question on that point about expanding Medicaid. I talked to a few years ago with Reverend William Barber, and he talked about being at a parade, and he said, and a white man came up to him, he said, with a Confederate flag draped around his neck, with tears in his eyes, thanking him and NAACP for fighting to keep rural hospitals open. This is one of those issues where a lot of white voters, poor white voters, were initially resistant to Moral Mondays until they realized, wait a minute, the issues they're talking about impact us. And I actually met a group of white women who were in the hills of North Carolina who opened an NAACP chapter. And so that issue of closing rural hospitals has a direct impact on those voters. Is that one that also separates you and your opponent, Representative Butt?
Well, it absolutely does. And we do know that so many people, because rural hospitals are closing, are traveling an hour and a half to give birth and other kinds of healthcare needs. And there's something deeply wrong with that. And so we know that access to healthcare is by cost, but it's also by proximity. I'm going to put North Carolina first. I think the other piece, too, that you just made the point is that so many of these issues really are not partisan. If you don't have clean air and clean water, doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. If you don't have access to good quality health care or to be able to get to a healthcare facility, it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. If you've been gerrymandered and live in a rural community, it doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican. And so many of these issues really do resonate, and people understand that these are issues and rights that people have here in this state that I'm going to fight for. And that does distinguish me between against Ted Butt, because he's not going to put North Carolina first.
Well, I was there in 2020 talking to you and some other candidates who are running. So look forward to being on the road this summer and the fall as well, coming to North Carolina and some other states that we plan on hitting. And so look forward to seeing you out there on the campaign trail.
I appreciate you, Roland. Thanks so much.
Thanks a bunch. Good luck.
Thank you.
Welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful. New, unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed. We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.